Welcome back to Connect and Transform. In this video, we're going to write a quick function to create random data to help demonstrate the rendering of the graph. And then I'll go over some line and stacked line code, and then we'll show some quick demos. First, I wanted to point out a single line of code that I modified. When we are creating series labels, we're still creating it in the upper right of the chart, but we're essentially reversing which labels are shown rightmost versus leftmost. I've modified this for loop. It used to start at 0 and increment, and now it starts high and decrements. But the actual function itself stayed exactly the same. So let's scroll up and write our data randomization function. So remember that init y-axis calls the function that auto scales the y-axis, and that may be necessary because the step or max value could be null. So we want to randomize our data after this point, after we've established what the y-axis is. But of course, we need to randomize it before we call this function, because at this point we are actually rendering the information. So we're going to just randomize the data right before we graph it. We're going to create a function. We're just going to say create random data. Okay, so we've got our function. Now I'm going to scroll down a little bit and I'm going to hunt around for some for loops. This one looks good. In fact, yes, I'm going to copy all of this and then we'll just cut out what we don't need. Okay, so we're starting out with a for loop for every series, and that's exactly what we want. We don't need any of that. And then we have a for loop looking at every data value, and that's exactly what we want. I guess we'll keep the iterator I just because it's used in so many places. We don't need that. We don't need that. Okay. So I think as written, this will randomize the default values for tooltips. We just need to update the data point values. So we're going to say graph data dot series at position S dot data values at position I equals, and then we'll say parse float, and it's going to be math dot random times whatever the range of the y-axis is. So that's going to be graph data dot y-axis dot max value minus graph data dot y-axis dot min value. And then that whole thing, the random times the range, we're going to add to it the minimum value. So graph data dot y-axis dot min value. And let's save. Let's go back over here and refresh, and we should see that the data randomizes and that it stays within the bounds of the y-axis. It got awfully close to 0 on that last one, but it's clearly working. Yep, technically that's still within the range. It got awfully close to both ends, but it's working. The other thing I'll note is that the tooltips are also working. So these are both, apparently near 1,000,000, 837, 412. We'll pick one in the middle here. We'll randomize it some more. And the tooltips are changing, and so are the lines. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to go back to our host file, and I'm going to change that to line stacked from line. We'll go back to our demo. Now remember, this is randomized. Okay. So it's working, but we're not readjusting our y-axis. So I'll have to come back and look at that in a future video, but let's go look at the code as it's written right now. Okay, so that would be init data line, which is this function here on screen. You can see the entire function. We have a few constants. We're tracking our graph width and our graph height, which are used in a few places. We're calculating pixels per unit. So when we're talking about the actual data value, what does that translate to in pixels? We are also storing, when we have stacked data, we're storing this array of stacked data values, and then we're basically adding all the data points at that index across all the series that we'd seen up to that point. And that helps us calculate our y-axis positioning. And then we've got a loop for each series. We've got various offsets, and we're keeping track of different groups and elements. And then we've got our main loop for data points. And then this little chunk here has to do with the stacking of the lines. So we're tracking a y2 data value, which is used in the positioning here. And then we're also, when we're getting ready to position this constant y1, we're using this value here, which is adjusted based on whether we're stacked or not. And then, various y offsets, the horizontal space taken by each data point. We're adjusting the line width, so we have some dynamic expressions, and then we have some basic bounds checking, make sure the line maintains a minimum width, setting various things like color, and then actually setting the line width, and so on. And then, X and Y positioning, and then we're dealing with the work in progress element and possibly applying this diagonal hatch mask. And oh, right. And so in the case of lines, not only do we have line segments going from one point to the next, but then we're also drawing two circles at the beginning of that line. So one of the circles is the same diameter as the line is wide, and that serves to kind of smooth the joint between two line segments. And then we have a second circle, which is bigger, which is one that you can hover over. And when you hover over it, then it becomes visible. So let me go back to the demo. So let's look, for example, at this point down here, 2021, the bottom brown line. When I hover, you see a large circle appears there. And if you look very closely, there actually is a small circle that is visible right now. So there's two circles and then a line segment. And then here, there's two circles at the 2022 location and then a line segment, and so on until you get to the very last section where you just have the two circles and then there is no line segment going off from the last data point. So that's basically the logic behind what it's doing. And again, we'll have to revisit the y-axis here. But I will point out that if we're auto-scaling the y-axis, normally the data would be provided. In this case, we're doing something special where we're randomizing the data after we've scaled the y-axis. So actually, it occurs to me that it is not a bug that this data is going off the screen. It's just the nature of how we're doing things. Because in the real world, the data would be provided. It wouldn't be randomized and created after the y-axis is scaled. The the y-axis would instead scale as a result of the data that already exists. So let me go back real quick here, and I'm just going to adjust that away from line stacked and back into line. Refresh. There we go. And then maybe real quick, maybe I'll just change work in progress to 2, and let's see if that's working. Okay, so it is. So I've made the work in progress 2. So 2021 is index 0, 2022 is index 1, 2023 is index 2. And so we see that everything, you know, from on and after that point is given a different styling. It has a little bit of a hatching to it. But because we're not drawing line segments into the future here, just the way that it's done, this isn't getting a hatching. Although I'm thinking that maybe I do want to adjust that by 1. I'll need to keep the integer version of it working exactly how it works today. So that would be, this one here is when it's integer based, and that's working. So maybe here I would say, now which data node is this? That's the line. So I think I would just say -2 instead of -1. Okay, so that's correct because we have work in progress true. So we're saying that the last data point, which in this case is 2025, we're saying that that is not for sure, that there's some or completely estimated data there. So it would make sense that the traversal from something we know to something that we don't know or is partially known would get a special treatment. And then, of course, if I go back here and if I change that work in progress to false, then we just see the normal view. So that is a very quick overview of the code. Again, I'll just end the video here where you can see the entire function that is rendering the line. Thanks for watching.